All right. Well, hey, thanks everyone for jumping on with us today. This is really just an opportunity for us to have a discussion that spans across experience and role and sort of progress and all these other things to talk about what is it actually like as a small business, as different roles in small business, and then even as a third party supporting the implementations of a small business when we get into the topics of CMMC. So for all of you here today, this is a pretty open conversation. We're not reading off a script here or anything like that. We just really wanted an opportunity to sit down and explore some of these different perspectives as it has to do with CMMC implementations. So with us today, we've got really three perspectives being represented. We've got, Kevin, you're more of an operations role in your organization. Karen, you're on the managed IT services side, so you're brought into a lot of these implementations. And then Bo, from your perspective, being internal IT, more on the technical side in an organization, we sort of have this triad of directions that we have to attack the CMMC implementation process. Kevin, if you don't mind, I'd like to just start with you. What are some of the things that when you look at a cybersecurity model, maybe on the operations side, we weren't thinking of just yet until we picked up the model and realized some of the non-technical work that had to be done?
I think a couple of things that kind of stood out that became apparent very quickly, and it was some of the traceability and auditability. Those requirements that we didn't have in place. Unique logins for some users, for example, was one. A file management system where I can understand what user is open, which CUI document at what particular time and date for investigation purposes should you need that later. Those things are in place today. They weren't in place in the beginning of this journey we're on. Those things jumped out at me at first. Supply chain was another thing that jumped out, and that's still an issue for me today, for us today. And vetting out our suppliers, all I can really do right now is survey our suppliers and have them tell me they're compliant or not. My first red flag is when they say they're fully compliant to all the NIST controls, because nobody is. But they're going to tell me they have a POAM or an SSP. I can't really confirm that. All I can do is trust that that's true and that it's an effective one. And then you run into the suppliers that maybe are sole sourced or limited source or directed source by our customers, and they have no intentions of ever being compliant to a NIST control. So what do you do then? That's a supply chain issue that I think exists. And as the certification process matures, I think that's going to help a lot. It'll be less on the supplier to vet the sub-tier supplier's compliance status.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kevin. I think anytime you have a new big regulatory push in any industry, one of the results is always consolidation, right? Just because some people don't want to get on the bandwagon. So I think we're going to see a lot of that.
Also in the commercial world, in a small piece of it is the defense and aerospace world, they may not want to invest in that infrastructure and change in processes and hardware to be compliant. They may choose to just opt out of that business altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. Karen, from your perspective, what are some of the things that weren't necessarily technical that you found yourself having to participate in conversations around?
Just with our customers.
Sure, yeah.
I just want to comment on something you mentioned before. So, you've got all of these regulations with CMMC and these areas you need to be, but just from our perspective as a company who works with small businesses, we're always looking at all points of risk and failure, and things like, making sure that maybe the vendors you work with are not fully compliant, but how do we create sort of walls or avenues that we can control the information that flows? Because even if a company is not ready to start this journey, is not far along the maturity model, we're constantly looking at things like, disaster recovery. We were talking about the backup tapes before. Oftentimes a single cyber event can destroy your backup tapes. and does destroy your backups, or if you don't have the right controls in place. So for companies like ours, we're always taking pieces of this and trying to say, how do we just shore up, these, whether it's backup, whether it's, certain processes, limiting access. Holistically, the CMMC has got a whole host of implications to the company, but you can take them and tackle them and prioritize them when you're a small business, piece by piece. And I think that's the biggest thing for us with our industry is that, we know you've got a limited number of resources and a limited number of people and funds, and it's really about prioritizing and having those conversations with our partners about what's needed now and make sure we address the critical items, but, creating that roadmap.
How do you, when you're working with a smaller organization with limited resources, how do you sort of stream what's next on the list to them in a way that is manageable without complete backlog and overload?
I think a lot of it depends on where their growth plans are, what's next for the company. In this sort of case, if you're looking into the future and you've got a contract that you want to participate and be part of, you've got to kind of work backwards, and that might be something that's next year, but we kind of have to work backwards with some of the investments you need to make. And if, for example, you're a smaller business and it turns out that you've got a critical business application on an unsupported operating system or server that's out of life, we have to kind of talk through what those risks are to your business and really just to your overall cyber posture, and we'll address those first. And it's a conversation that, any type of business, whether you have an internal IT department or you outsource it completely or you have a partnership with an IT department, these are the conversations you should be having, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and creating that list of priorities. And again, depends on kind of budget and really what you've got going on.
Sure. Now, Bo, from your perspective, external service providers, right? They can provide a certain level of objectivity, right? They're maybe not as ingrained in some of the office politics or whatever it might be. When you're internal IT, like you are in your role, leading technical teams in-house, what are some of the challenges or the victories that you can claim winning over the boardroom for your cause or getting a bigger amount of the team on board for the effort?
Yeah, I'd really like to just take a couple minutes and just really talk through that whole thing. Yeah. As a Department of Defense contracting firm that doesn't really specialize in IT, we started out and there wasn't really much of a concerted effort from my ownership and my leadership on IT as as something fundamentally to do. In fact, when I started, we worked with a managed service provider. It's Consortium. I met Karen today for the first time. But I think at the beginning of that relationship, we were kind of just throwing our computer support over the fence to them. And so when I got into the role and we really started forming our IT department, and my leadership's showing me the CMMC guidance, and I start reading this stuff, it is overwhelming beyond overwhelming. And so after a couple of weeks of just running around in circles, I finally was like, what do I need to do? And I was really thankful to see like Ryan's notes from the last two presentations, everything was cross-referenced with the NIST. And that was actually what I decided was the first thing I needed to do. I went and I spent a week and I just cross-referenced everything. I'm like, okay, I got NIST, I got CMMC. I tried to cross-reference it with other guidance like ISO and other things as well. And I just tried to get my brain around what it looked like. From there, I was able to go, okay, I need to do a system security plan first and a POAM along with it, which meets two of the practices. And once I did that, I was kind of off and running. But I think circling back to your question, I think at that point, it was when I became aware of how to really engage with Consortium as an MSP and really guide them for what we needed so that they could then be a good partner and really like provide us that consulting and that information they needed back for us.
Hearing a recurring theme here, which is, you know, how do we manage externalities, right? I've got these third parties, right? So Kevin, you were saying that, how do we know when data's flowing the way it should? How do we have the right agreements in place? You know, who is our constituency for those kinds of challenges? And then, you know, Bo, you're talking about managing a set of conversations with a third party and not just kicking it over the fence, but maybe even, you know, telling them that, you know, something is coming over the fence before it happens. So, like, how far ahead of difficult conversations about new requirements or things are going to become different? Like, how do you feather in that kind of conversation and be more collaborative with those suppliers so they don't get completely blindsided?
You know, I think you kind of have to ease them into it, and obviously there's a wide array of levels of maturity in cybersecurity for suppliers, and a lot of the smaller ones are the ones that are a little more challenged. It's not an easy process, but you know, I think you mentioned externalities, and one of the externalities is, and we were lucky enough to actually work with the Maryland Innovation and Security Institute to guide us through this process, that we're still working with them today. But you know, as all of you probably do, I get emails every day, 5 or 6 get through our email security service touting their cybersecurity subject matter experts, and they can guide us through this journey that we're calling it. How do we vet them out? How does a small business vet them out and really know if they're capable of doing that? Are they who they say they are? The MISI team has credentials with the DoD, so that's why we opted to go with them. But what about all these other companies that are saying they can do exactly what MISI does, but they really cannot, or maybe even worse, have some malicious intent? Because you're really letting them into your systems. All of your data is now right there for them. And it worries me that smaller, particularly smaller companies, may not have the wherewithal to understand what the risk is there and assess that. Where's that guidance? There's no certifying body, as far as I know, that tells them that a company that does this can actually do this.
Any thoughts or comments on that for any of the other involved parties here?
You know, one of the things that we encounter as a smaller company, you know, we try to communicate. Well, we unfortunately, a number of our clients that we come to us have come to us by way of an event, and a reaction. Something took place. They had a breach. They are in a critical, you know, crisis, and they need somebody other than their internal team that they put the faith that was taking care of their needs. They need help. So, you know, when you're looking through all of these, we're in that process of helping them get their business restored, getting access to their data, getting their systems up and running, helping them create the incident responses that they're going to have to file, figuring out what happened and helping them document that. So that's one reason we sadly adopt a lot of our new customers. They've come from that type of situation. But the things that we can do as a partner, you know, you've got lots of different companies that have different specialties, but at the end of the day, for a smaller company like ours who works with, you know, not I would say smaller company, but for a company like ours who works in all components, you know, we're looking at everything from, again, the people, the processes you have in place, the training that's across the board, and it's all connected, you know, and if you want to go down this path of CMMC, this isn't just about putting IT systems in place. This is really going to have an impact on every component of your organization, from HR to marketing and sales. And I think that you really got to bring kind of in the talent and bring in the teams to take a look at it from different lenses to make sure you're holistically going in the right direction.
And I think it's important to note that there's still going to be a lot of work for that company to do. You're not going to hand another company the keys and say, make me CMMC level 3 compliant, and then let me know when you're done. That's not really what's going to happen. There's still a lot of work to be done. But getting that guidance is very helpful, and it kind of keeps you on the path. where you may not do that internally if you didn't have that external support.
Sure. Now, I'd be curious to hear from all of you. I think there's a lot of different opinions in the space as far as how do you know that a service provider can make a difference in your implementation. And one of the questions that invariably gets asked is, will my MSP need to be CMMC Level 3 certified themselves in order for me as a contractor to be compliant? What are your thoughts on that, sort of being involved in all aspects around that topic?
I'll defer to you.
All right, I'll take a go at it. So I've done some research on this, obviously, because we're partnered with an MSP. And from what I can gather, I think there are ways to navigate the situation. Certainly, if your MSP is not, let's say you want to get to CMMC Level 3, and that's what you're aspiring for. Your MSP is not at Level 3. You might have to try to take a siloed approach, is probably the simplest way I can say it. Explicitly in work that we're doing with Consortium, we've come up with this approach where we are going to try to, because we're a work from home remote workforce primarily, at least our headquarters team is. So we don't have servers, we don't have any of that infrastructure really. What we're doing to try to get to that CMMC Level 3 so we can, play on these contracts that require that in effect. What we are doing is, and Consortium's helping us do this, we're building a cloud environment that is siloed from our commercial environment that is GCC high, IL4, and can be accessed by those who need to access that environment where our CUI would be stored and contained without intermingling that with the rest of our commercial systems.
Any other thoughts on?
There's some benefits. Does the whole because obviously the complexity of getting a Level 3 CMMC grows. How big is your organization? How many locations do you have? What processes? There's a lot of factors that increase the cost. And so, does the entire organization need to have compliance, or is there a way to segment very specific components of your organization that have access to CUI and processes and people? And if you can do those pieces of it, it might be more tenable from a cost perspective, and also just from getting that certification and meeting those needs.
Yeah, we really don't have a model where we're going to silo anything. It's really everything we deal with is going to potentially be CUI, so we treat it as such. So there's no siloing with our company. I can see where that would be a good approach if you could do that. That could be very challenging though, with using common systems, right? There are ways to do that, obviously, but I could see that being challenging for a company to do.
Absolutely. I think we see a lot of different decisions starting to come out of these discussions, and I think a lot of it is really driven by the needs of the business, right? So if CUI is ubiquitous, then it's rare to find something in the business that doesn't need protection. If you've got more focused points of contact where CUI comes into the organization, and we sort of control and enclave that data, isolate it, that makes a lot of sense, especially if there's a lot of systems diversity or work from home type situations. And I think that we're seeing a lot of different, not necessarily stereotypical deployments, but we're starting to see these patterns emerge where I'm either going organization-wide with my safeguarding program and almost enclaving in reverse, like setting aside the systems that just can't be secured, or I'm starting with an enclave and then I'm just slowly winning back parts of the business and securing it as we go. is there a set of discussions that you feel need to happen in organizations to decide how to deploy your safeguarding program based on the needs of the business?
Wow, I mean, that's a really good point. And I want to say, like, in my journey, or in our company's journey, I started off with that approach of, oh, we're gonna do this organizationally. This is kind of what, you know, my leadership wants to do. This is what we're gonna do. And as I started peeling back the onion, I'm like, wait a second. If we do this, there's gonna be a financial, it's gonna be a lot, you know? And so I take that back to my leadership. I'm like, here's how much we're gonna spend doing this. Do you wanna do this? Or alternatively, I'm looking at this other idea. And then in researching that, I'm asking not only people at Consortium, I'm asking anybody that will talk to me. I'm, you know, colleagues that are looking to be C3PAOs, just anybody that will pretty much listen to me and answer questions and just share ideas, because I really think that's what it ultimately takes to get there. And Kevin, I also think, like, how do you discern these companies? Like, for me, it's just, for anything, universally, if somebody's presenting themselves as a solution, I'm running their ideas and their references by anybody and everybody. Hey, does this really hold weight? Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
References and ideas, but also just with your suppliers too. Find out what they're doing internally with their teams to keep their skills current. What are their certifications? Are they Microsoft Gold partners? Do they have current certifications, or whatever the platforms are? You know, and what is the team that you'd be engaged with? What do their certifications look like? Because it's showing that they're getting continuing education, it's showing that they're attending training, and that this is knowledge that your suppliers you would expect should be able to bring back to your organization.
But I think the challenge is a lot of companies may not know what questions to ask. What should they ask? And how should they vet out some of these other companies? They're really going to, a lot of cases, need a consultant to help guide them through that process of choosing the right partner to help them achieve what they want to achieve.
Yeah, that's certainly a challenge. We run into it all the time, just working with manufacturers here in the area through FloridaMakes. I mean, there's, you know, I don't want to say trick questions, but like questions that immediately reveal how much time someone has spent, you know, on these topics. You know, do I need multi-factor on an iPhone? Do I need what do you think I should do for cloud that handles CUI? And like, just see how deep they can go.
Those are your trick questions.
Well, I mean, there are things that are grounded in either like existing guidance or something that's written into contract language, or things like that let you know that someone's really kind of poking around and thinking about these ideas, you know.
Yeah.
And then how far have they gotten outside of just the CMMC model? Like, if they're going to tell me all about security cameras I should have to monitor my facility, and they're recommending Chinese-made chipset cameras that are on a NDAA ban list, maybe they haven't, you know, gotten those requirements together.
Yeah, but back to my point, though, is you would know, you guys would know the right questions to ask. I might not even know the right. I probably do now. I wouldn't have known that 3 or 4 years ago. Before I've been educated a little bit over the years, but I wouldn't have known what to look for necessarily. So I think that, you know, providing some guidance for businesses in that area is very valuable, and it's a risk mitigation factor too, right? So companies don't know what they don't know sometimes.
Now, if we could mentally turn like the clocks back 3-4 years ago, like we were saying, what are some of the things that, if I knew that back then, life would be different. My implementation would have been different. I wouldn't have spent this much time on that. What are some advice or guidance we could give to someone who's just kind of getting into this topic?
You know, I think again, at the beginning of the journey, it was just around and around and around for a couple of weeks before I was like, okay, what am I going to do here? I think, you know, the first thing I ended up doing again was cross-referencing everything. But if somebody had to tell me, or if I could tell myself at the beginning what I know now, I would tell myself, the first thing I would do is I'd say, ignore everything except for the level 1 practices. Go look at those 17 practices, ignore all the process side of the house completely, ignore levels 2 through 5. Just go look at those 17 practices. Make sure we're doing those things, because those things are cross-referenced with FCI. And if you're going to do business with the government, you need to be doing those 17 practices. And frankly, if you're not doing businesses with the government, there's still good security practices that you should be doing. After that, the second thing you should do is make a system security plan. If I'm talking to anybody here in this room that hasn't done that yet, and if you haven't done the level 1 practices, go look at those first, but then do the system security practice, do the POAM, and I think once you do those things, I think the fog begins to lift a little bit. And you'll also start realizing, as I think Ryan has alluded to a couple of times, like, oh, we really are doing all these level 2 and 3 practices as well, which was actually the case when I really started digging into everything.
Awesome. Go ahead.
I don't think this is a question for me.
Your question, I think, was what would we have done differently? I think they're fairly minor. We were lucky, well, not lucky, it was by design. We actually had some pretty good systems and best practices in place even before this really became a spotlight. But, there were things like where we were implementing unmanaged switches, things like that we had to change over to managed switches. But we had a lot of the right hardware and network infrastructure in place that corrects the firewalls, the email security services, the network, inventory management software. The pieces we were missing in some cases, that last one I'll mention, the network inventory software. So that software will tell you all of the current revisions of all the softwares on every piece of network gear, tell you if your antivirus is up to date on every machine, an endless array of reports. The part we were really missing was somebody monitoring all of that data. So we have this nice software that's capable of doing all these things, but there isn't that team or that person that is looking at that. The email security service, it blocks tens of thousands of emails that try to get through our email server every week. But there's nobody really looking at it for trending and trying to improve upon it. It's there, it's doing its job, but nobody's really managing it. That's the piece I think we were missing back then and are now starting to develop those processes and procedures and policies. Sometimes it's just creating or modifying a GPO. They're simple tasks, but there's a lot of them. And and really a lot of this, especially in level 2 and level 3, is documentation of SOPs and task instructions. Well, it isn't typically one you're modifying. That one touches 3, 4, 5, maybe other SOPs or procedures. So it really grows. I think we probably underestimated the scope of that 3 or 4 years ago. I probably should have just went out and hired 5 IT people to just focus on that. And we probably would be further along than we are today. But, with the team that we have now, definitely the Missy team has helped us, stay on that path and continues to do so.
I guess from the provider side, that is our core business, is really, monitoring and checking those logs and capturing this and applying, enterprise tooling that might be unaffordable for smaller business to have and invest in on their own. And really that comes for our purposes. The successful relationship is going to come from having those conversations regularly with businesses like yours and saying, here is what we're seeing from the data. Here's what it's showing us. Here's, if this was an event log, here's what happened, and here's, the threat assigned to it, and here's the remediation. And it really then working with, as you're going through these types of assessments, this isn't the only type of assessment we do. We help our customers with, as companies in our space, whether it's filling out applications for cyber insurance policies or HIPAA assessments or other things that need to take place. We have access to data that we want to work and share with you, but we will often have to work with your CMMC consulting firm assessor or with other partners. And it's really about just having that collaboration and understanding what is the goal and pulling in the right people, because oftentimes it's going to come from lots of different places. It may not all be in one area. So how do we make the information available to the people that need it and help, contribute to that process?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Karen. And I will say to Kevin's point, if I could go hire 5 IT people, I might not need an MSP. I could just do my own shop. But I will say, I think Karen's firm, Consortium, they do a really good job of having that annual touch point and saying, hey, here's where we are now, and here are the recommendations. And I can take those recommendations or not. That's my choice. And I think if you're out there and you're in my shoes and you're considering this, I will say there's also a level where, Karen probably doesn't want to hear this, but I have to manage them as well. I have to say, okay, hey, here are the things that I want to do. We're a government firm. We're going towards CMMC, and here are the agendas that are important for us as a firm. I think anytime you work with any vendor, you have to really, you have to put in. You get out what you put in, basically. You can't just throw something over. You can't throw something over the wall to a CMMC consultant and expect to come out level 3 certified. It's not going to work that way. It's the same way with an MSP or really with anything else.
And I was hoping, by the way, that was the case whenever we just hired this. We would just, I could just go home and not worry about it, but there's still a lot of
CMMC,
yeah.
Thank you.
There's still a lot of work to do.
Be like me hiring the best fitness trainer and expecting to lose 20 pounds in the next one. You got to put a little work into it sometimes. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are right here, Ryan. Right? We pay you.
I have yet to find an approach where you just click a button and then
It doesn't work.
We often advise anytime someone seems to be making incredibly outsized claims about how much they can make you compliant, that's probably more of a turnoff than anything, or should give you pause.
It's a red flag.
Yeah. Now, Kevin, you kind of surprised me there for a minute, because your description of a lot of the tools that your organization has in use made you sound a lot more technical than you let on. Is this a wolf in sheep's clothing here on the operations side?
Well, my undergrad is actually in IT, but I've really been in engineering and operations most of it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, from any of your collective shared experience, when you're getting into, and this could be really any shift in requirements, right, that are being imposed from regulators or an outside customer, whatever it might be, have there been some pleasant surprises along the way for parts of the business or teams or departments who have been able to help with CMMC in a way that we didn't originally have on our radar?
So surprises internally?
Sure. I mean, it could be an external service provider. It could be someone in accounting. Whatever it might be. Are there skill sets or proficiencies that you didn't think would be a part of cybersecurity that are sort of somehow valuable in that effort?
I don't know if I have an answer for that. Any surprises?
I'll take a go. And I'm focused on IT for my firm, but I think as I started unpeeling the onion and seeing what was in CMMC, I really came to realize there were a couple of practices there's several practices actually that they don't, they're not highly IT based. The whole separation of duties is the one that just really pops on the top of my head where, I get that from an IT perspective, but it doesn't say computer systems. I take that to be, your financial, you don't want the fox guarding the hen house in any scenario. Really, I read it as all controls you have as a company. And I do think there are some practices in there that go beyond IT, and I try to engage my my colleagues in those cases and educate them and share with them and just make sure we're documenting what we need to document. So from a non-IT perspective, we're doing what we're supposed to be.
Absolutely. Now, Karen, from your perspective.
From my perspective, yes, just, one of the big surprises for me is that, running an IT firm is that it's not really about IT that often, I don't think. I think IT is, we've got tools and ideas, and we partner, but it really is about running a business. So what used to be conceived of as here's what I'm going to spend on my IT budget, and here's my IT person at my company or IT people. It's as we grow and as some of the challenges in the landscape, whether it's work from home or phishing campaigns that are impacting my employees, or whether it's just having a more complicated business model because I've now have offices in 5 states and I have to connect to each other, and I've got international customers, and my customers are now online, and I didn't used to be online in the same way and sell online the same way as I am today. It's not really about IT. It's really just about how IT is impacting every component of my organization. And I guess that's the biggest surprise. Sometimes you make decisions that are because of one challenge, and you don't even realize how that decision has really enabled your business to grow down the road. And we just don't know, where our growth is going to come from, and where some of the future challenges. Some of them you can predict, but I think you just need to make decisions and evolve your systems in general.
Yeah, that's great advice. So often IT is really just a means to an end to enable some sort of larger strategy. So if we don't have strong strategy, we're going to have poor systems. Mike Aller and I did a research project where we went through all the original controls that were used to build CMMC. And in NIST's control summaries, they tell you whether a control is an O control, meaning that it's expected to be implemented by the organization through non-technical means, or whether it's an S, which means it's a systems implementation, technical configuration. And we were really blown away. I think if you don't think about process maturities like policy and procedure, it was 70% non-technical controls used to build the CMMC model. And if you include process maturity, it's like 82% non-technical. A lot of those are non-technical processes about the use of technology, but it's amazing how much of that is, for lack of a better term, paper pushing and strong process. We've really had a lot of conversations with managed IT service providers where it feels less like you're providing IT and it feels more like you're providing process that just happens to involve or include IT. So, well, hey, thanks everyone for taking the time to just kind of sit up here and hang out with us and talk about some of these challenges and topics. CMMC isn't something that necessarily starts or ends, it just kind of is. So I'm sure if we brought you back in 3 years' time, frazzled and wild-eyed, you'd have some more tales from the desert for us. But we thank you for your time in regards to this conversation.